Hey guys, in this video I'm just going to go over what I think are the 3 best Barbarian starting builds, and I'm pretty sure they're also probably the 3 best in-game Barbarian builds. I haven't actually played the in-game closed beta that a lot of people have played, but I don't really see how it's going to be anything different, judging off everything that's been kind of data mined. But anyway, we'll go through each one. So we'll start with Whirlwind build. I'll just kind of go over the trees. This is just for the first 50 levels, no Paragon stuff like that. And then kind of like the gear you can target farm from Codex stuff. So, and some of the itemization type stuff like that. So, Whirlwind, you're going to go Lunging Strike. This is pretty much the most convenient generator or whatever, because it has like a built-in little mobility mechanic, kind of teleports you to the mob. Still generates good Fury, so Lunging Strike. Whirlwind, you're going to rush Furious Whirlwind, so you'll be like 1 point, 1 point, 1 point. Eventually you'll switch to Violent Whirlwind when you want the raw damage, but the dot mechanic, even at 1 point, just rushing it is really good for trash mobs. It pretty much instantly kills them all. So this is like, it'd be like 1 point Whirlwind, 1 point Enhanced Whirlwind, then Furious Whirlwind by like level 5 or whatever, level 6. Then you'd probably dump Whirlwind more until you can get Rallying Cry, but eventually Pressure Point. This is good for vulnerability. With Lucky Hit, I'm pretty sure Whirlwind is actually the best core skill for applying Lucky Hit because it hits so frequent. Even though it says 25%, I mean, it hits multiple times a second versus like 50% on hota or 20% on upheaval, double swing, whatever. But Pressure Point, very, very good for Whirlwind. Eventually you'll take some of this stuff. This will be like later. Mostly just going to go for the main skills, but we're going to full dump into Rallying Cry, Unstoppable. I'm pretty sure every single Barb build just uses this, all the exact same 3 lines, so you'll notice that consistency across all these starting builds. There's some choice here for this tree. You can tailor it to your liking, but it's either Warcry or Leap. I think Warcry is slightly overrated early game, so you can go a Leap angle, which I do that in some of the other ones. You can just use that on the Whirlwind build. They're kind of interchangeable, so it's either Warcry or Leap. I don't think you go both. It's one or the other. Since I'm double shouting here, it makes sense to use Booming Voice. And then Raid Leader, this will give you a lot of healing, so some amount of sustain is good outside of potions. Berserking, like I said, Fury Generation is going to be really good on all builds. So more Fury Generation, Rallying Cry Fury Generation, and then this while Berserking conditional. Eventually we'll want Swiftness. You don't have to get that right off the bat, but 12% movement speed, 4% per point is pretty good. Hamstring, so the thing with this is we tap into crowd control, damage multipliers, and slowed multipliers, that kind of stuff that you'll find on like weapons and gear. All I have to do is put 1 point here. If you're not using this and you need to bleed a target, you can just change your weapon expertise or whatever, which you'll get later in the game. I think it's like probably around like level 15 to 20 or something like that. If you just rush through the campaign, you can just set your weapon expertise to a 2-handed sword, which automatically applies bleeding every time you hit something, and then you get this conditional. It's the synergies. So you'll see this a lot across all Barb builds where they're taking this, and that's the reasoning, is to gain the damage benefits from crowd-controlled and slowed enemies that you'll be finding on your gear. Death Blow is extremely good, I think, early game. Basically, it just replaces your generator, unless it gets put on cooldown, but as long as you are killing white mobs in 1 hit, basically you're getting over double the Fury. You could also use it as a berserking generator, that makes sense as well. And you can also pump more points if you really want to, but we're only going 1 point here, and we're just using it to generate Fury, and then we're using it for another purpose. We would normally rush this like 1 point, 1 point, and then put at least 1 point here. So what this does is, after you use a Weapon Mastery skill, which Death Blow is, causes your next core skill, aka Whirlwind in this case, to apply Vulnerable for the next 2 seconds. Thing is, you can snapshot this, so as long as you have this, you Death Blow, or maybe you playing Steel Grasp, but basically use a Death Blow. This will trigger your next core skill to apply vulnerability, and then for that entire duration of that Whirlwind being channeled, it will apply vulnerability to everything that you hit on the first time it does damage to that target. I don't believe it will last the whole, like if you're hitting a single target, it'll just keep reapplying vulnerability. I think it's only for that first tick. So that's why we have this, and why we're still taking pressure point, because if it did apply the entire whirlwind channel, which I didn't test, but people have told me that it won't like have 100% uptime if you play this way. So you still do need pressure point, I believe. It definitely is very, very, very good on trash mobs, because you're going to pretty much apply vulnerability to all of them instantly, and it's crazy, crazy good. So we want that. Wrath of the Berserker. You could also use Call the Ancients. Call the Ancients on the third point has a built-in Fury generator, which is really nice for early game. Fury generation is really good, but Wrath of the Berserker also gives you Fury gen from giving you Berserk, and it also has the second node gives you 30% increased Fury generation here as well. So Wrath of the Berserker or Call the Ancients both are good. We're using this just because Whirlwind has a lot of stuff to make it crit more often than other skills, so we're taking this. You could also actually Whirlwind with a bludgeoning weapon, and since we're consistently applying vulnerability, this is quite good as well. But that's kind of a different thing. So here, I'm not sure. I just took Walking Arsenal because we are using multiple different skills. So let's say we're Whirlwinding with our two-handed slashing weapon, maybe we're lunging with our one-handers, and then we're death blowing with our two-handed bludgeoning weapon. So we are consistently swapping weapons. The only downside about this is it only lasts 6 seconds. So you're probably ideally not wanting to Whirlwind on a target for more than 6 seconds straight before, you know, kind of going through pressing all the other buttons at least once again to reapply a full buff of Walking Arsenal, 45% more damage when they're all up. Ideally you would use Unbridled Rage, but I don't know how realistic it's going to be in like the early mid game to have Fury to play with, much Fury to play with. So I don't think Unconstrained is that good. You could use this, but Gushing Winds is the only one you wouldn't use here. But I think Walking Arsenal on the average is probably what you want here. If you have crazy good Fury generation, maybe find some legendaries or whatever, maybe play Unbridled Rage. But I think eventually you want to play Unbridled Rage. So that's basically what the choice is between these two. If you really want to be lazy, you can play Unconstrained, I guess. But I think Walking Arsenal in general is the safest because you are using a lot of buttons. Also, if you are playing Leap Slam, you can attach a different ability to that, like I said earlier, if you want to play the Leap Slam route. So that's pretty much Whirlwind's skill tree. I didn't fill out every single legendary power here. I just took the ones that I think are making a significant enough difference that are worth it to target farm. All of these are farmable from dungeons. So this one is kind of, I think every single build in the game probably actually uses this. It's kind of silly how good it is. It's basically just 50% more armor, right? So, well, I guess 25% on the low roll, but it's still very significant. So, tells you where each one of these are farmable in the game. So, this will be your Fortify generator. You do need something that generates Fortify. It's mandatory, I think, it's not even I think, it's mandatory in every single Barb build, probably on every Druid build as well. This is pretty nice. It's just free damage. For Whirlwinding, this guy pretty much will spawn instantly, like I said before. Lucky hit on Whirlwind is extremely good. Very, very good. There are things you could farm here for this slot if you really want to, but they don't make that much of a difference. And you'll probably find some stuff anyway, so these are just the things that I think are significant enough to farm. This just extends your berserking. It's really good while you're whirlwinding through mobs if you have berserking up, so it'll help extend the duration of your berserking. Very good, worth farming. This thing, you want to put it on one of your two-handed weapons because it's going to give you a lot of crit chance. It does require you to channel it for a while, so good synergy there. With with this 30% more damage after you've spun for 2 seconds, so ideally eventually you have enough Fury generation to spin for, you know, more than just a couple seconds. From, you know, like 5, 6, 7 seconds is pretty good. Expectant, this is basically just auto attack a couple times and then your Whirlwind snapshots, like I said. So Whirlwind, 30% more damage, pretty good. Doesn't matter what the roll is that much. You just would lunge in this case 6 times and then your you'd lunge 6 times and then your Whirlwind's going to do 30% more damage for the full channel. Good Ghost Walker aspect. I put it on the amulet. It's pretty good. It's just movement speed, and it lasts quite a while since it'll be like you rallying cry, you get unstoppable, and then even for 4 seconds after that, you get even more movement speed. Pretty nice. Mobility is good. 2 second per Fury shout thing. Works on all your shouts. It stacks up on each one, so we're using 2 shouts here. I don't think challenging shout was worth it to use early, but in game eventually, I'm sure it's pretty much a mandatory skill because that skill is crazy. It's just the uptime is too bad in the early game, so we're not using challenging shout, but we're using the other 2. Aspect of the Umbral, this thing synergizes with hamstring like I was showing before, and if we're using like a 2-handed sword or whatever here I have a 2-handed axe, but we just pretend like we're using a 2-handed sword here or whatever, so axe and swords are probably the best. But basically you will crowd control everything that you hit with this build, and you'll be gaining resource fury because of it, so very good. And then we have Edge Master's aspect here, which just makes your skills do more damage based off the basically you just want to get a full resource bar, full fury bar before you start spinning. Full fury bar, it'll snapshot all this stuff, it'll take the highest value, whatever, and then you hold down your whirlwind. If you do shout during whirlwind, it should break your channel, even though it doesn't look like it. Just basically, once you start spinning, you don't press any buttons, and then when you're ready to spin again, you shout, essentially. So, get your fury up, get all this stuff set up conditional, all these little buffs, shout, and then start spinning through mobs, basically is the gameplay. Vulnerability. Vulnerability is really easy to apply with Whirlwind, so we want vulnerability here, because vulnerability will work on bosses where like slow and crowd control doesn't really work on bosses unless they're like staggered or whatever, which we're probably not meeting that threshold anyway. Damage reduction while Fortify. I think Fortify is mandatory. It's broken. It's really good. You have to use it on every barb build, so we're stacking Fortify, investing more into it. We just have armor in these jewelry things, so that's fine. Two-handed axe, two-handed sword is what you kind of want here. Vulnerability, like I said, very easy to apply, so we want to take advantage of that and make sure we're bleeding all of our targets, which you can just make your weapon technique, whatever, here into two-handed sword. So that's that. That's pretty much starting Whirlwind build. It's not my #1 go-to, but I think it's pretty good. This, if you just want to spin the win, whatever, it is pretty nice. It's easy to play. Alright, Hota. You'll see a lot of consistencies here, and you'll see maybe some weird things that maybe I did that other people don't think. But I'll kind of go over my thought process. So, this is Hammer of the Ancients. My generator here, like, we probably would use Lunging Strike early, but Hota has a huge problem that I'll talk about. But we're using Flay, which doesn't seem to make sense, other than the fact that this applies a vulnerability, which vulnerability is good. Hammer of the Ancients. This node is very good. Helps you do a lot more damage when you have a big Fury pool. I think probably endgame you probably get somewhere like 200 to 300 Fury, somewhere around there. So it's going to be adding a lot of damage. And then this gives you some extra Fury generation. Eventually we will want Pressure Point. You don't have to get it right out of the bat, but vulnerability is, like I said, mandatory on every single build, which is something that Hota has a huge weakness with, and that's applying vulnerability, whereas it's a lot easier to do it with Whirlwind. Same thing here with Rallying Cry. You'll see this consistently in all the builds. Probably every single barb build will have this. There's no variation, I don't think, here. Just these extra points later, just for damage reduction stuff. Here is what the leap kind of setup looks like. You can either go leap, or you can go Warcry. There's justification in both, but here we're using leap. Shorter cooldown than Warcry is the logic here, until you have like a bunch of legendary powers, but we're pretending like we don't have anything farmed yet. So leap, and then we want this to generate 40 Fury, which is very good. And then it makes us take this node. So we need to make sure we put 3 points into Battle Fervor, which makes our leap. As long as we hit a target, it generates Berserking for 3 seconds. And we're using this as well for more Fury generation. So basically, you just kind of leap into a bunch of mobs, get a bunch of Fury, and then you can hammer the Ancients, blah, 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 whatever. Pretty sure this is pretty much, you'll see this in every build as well. Maxing Swiftness for movement speed. Death Blow here, you could also use Steel Grasp potentially. So, Steel Grasp or Death Blow on this one, I think. If you were to go Steel Grasp, you would get the Berserking node at the end here, but There's justification for sure to be made with using Steelgrass. I just like Deathblow early game leveling as a way to generate a lot of fury, and it actually hits really hard without any gear, so it's pretty good. Oh, this is just the fortify nodes. You'll take those eventually, and then we're doing the same thing here with you know, the crit chance here, and then the vulnerability. So Deathblow. Now our Hammer of the Ancients is going to apply vulnerability. Here I took Call the Ancients for Fury generation. You could go Wrath of Berserker for sure. So it's kind of like, this is like the opposite preference, but I think it makes a little bit more sense to play like Leap in a hota build than in a Whirlwind build early game. So that is why I've chosen it, but there's justification to be made using either or. A little bit of difference here is we're using each time you swap a weapon, you gain 6 Fury. So that's like, we would use maybe our one-handers here on Flay, and you can set this manually in game if you want to. Obviously, you have to use your two-handed bludgeoning weapon on your hota, and then we maybe put like our two-handed slashing or something like that on our leap, and then maybe like our two-handed slashing also on Deathblow or something like that. Just so we're constant. Basically, the better way to look at this is whenever you use a different skill, you're going to generate 6 Fury, which is really good. And then we're getting some life sustain since I'm not getting. You can actually put more points into this if you really wanted to, but since we're only using one shout, we're not really investing into these shout nodes to give us sustain, so we're getting it here. So as you spend Fury, you get HP back. It's kind of nice. And then here we're using Unbridled Rage. I think you always use Unbridled Rage on Hammer of the Ancients, and I mean, you could use Walking Arsenal to be fair, but I still think just getting the big, huge Hammer of the Ancients hits is probably the way to play this. So we want a lot of Fury generation so we can maintain this. And then the thing I was saying about vulnerability on this skill, why it's kind of bad, is you're not going to be Hammer the Ancientsing like a single target like 4 times in a row or something. More than likely, it's based off of how much Fury you had when using it. So you want to ideally have a big, huge Fury pool, then dump it, maybe 1 or 2 hotas, and then build that Fury pool back up. So if your Hammer the Ancients applies vulnerability, I don't think that hota that applied vulnerability gains the damage benefits of vulnerability, which is extremely important. That is the reasoning why we're taking Flay here, and why I said there's justification in using Steelgrass to apply vulnerability, because hota has a huge problem, and I think even at endgame it has a huge problem that isn't like really that cleanly solved, judging off anything that I've seen data mine, to consistently keep vulnerability up on a target. Like, you're gonna have to do a lot of stuff to you're gonna have to do a lot of things to invest into applying vulnerability for hota at all stages, like in-game and early game. So I do think vulnerability is a mandatory stat, and it's extremely important to have a high uptime and maintain it, but hota seems to have this weakness that it's like a chore to get vulnerability on your targets that you're trying to DPS on hota. So this is probably what I'm going to level with, but it does, I do recognize its issues. And it's mostly centered around vulnerability application. It's kind of bad. Anyway, the gear, you'll see a lot of the same stuff here. So the armor stuff, your fortify generation, berserking, extending the berserking. So the only thing different here versus the other one is, also I didn't say this before, I don't think Whirlwind really benefits much, if at all, from overpower. I don't think the first tick even counts for overpower. Obviously it's not gonna overpower your entire Whirlwind, but hota can overpower, obviously, so this is worth a little bit of extra DPS mileage, so I think it's worth farming. And then we're using this hota thing. This makes the Hammer of the Ancients area of effect like 3 times bigger. It's quite noticeable, so this is like, once you have this on hota, it's really good. I'm probably not playing hota until I actually have this power. So that is that. Then most of this other stuff is pretty much the exact same. Intercom is something we're using different here. It's just when you're stationary, obviously that doesn't work on Whirlwind, but it will work on a hota. It's just like every once in a while you'll get a little bit of extra damage. It's not worth really playing around, but I think it's worth farming. You'll get a little bit of extra damage bonus here and there on single target. Pretty good. Gem setup, pretty much the same. You could use the crowd controlled one. I forget what color it is, but it's crit damage bonus while crowd controlled. Yeah, it's blue gems, so you could use blue gems in weapons as well, but I just put it in the vulnerability one, so it works on single target, like bosses and stuff like that. And then we will look at rend. Rend is just consistently good, I think. but it doesn't seem to have that. It's hard for me to judge how good it's going to be at in-game, but I think the other two skills are probably going to scale better at in-game, and a lot of that has to do with like crit. But rend does have good synergy with the vulnerability, so I'll kind of show you what rend looks like leveling. So flay, obviously all this stuff is good. Extra bleeding damage, vulnerability, so you can just like flay a single target, and then rend's second node extends the duration, and that's kind of like your vulnerability is already kind of solved, right? With rend, which is really nice, and it makes it easy to build around. The only thing I don't like about rend is its AoE is really, really bad. It's real bad, so. Single target, really, really good early. I think it might even be the best single target skill on the Barb by a good amount in the early game. So rend, pretty good if you want the raw damage. Just AoE kind of stuff is kind of bad. A lot of the same stuff you'll see here with this. So Rallying Cry, same thing in every build. We're using the leap setup here again with this 3 points here for Berserking and Fury Generation. Swiftness, like all the others, we're using a... The reason I have this is bosses move, and a lot of targets move a lot, so sometimes your vulnerability will just like drop off. And then I'm using the Steel Grass setup here. I'm showing you a lot of it has to do with like rend's AoE is pretty awful. So you like Steel Grasp, it kind of bunches up mobs for you anyway, gives you Berserking vulnerability that you rend. But I think this is always really good. Just you want to apply that vulnerability as fast as possible and then get it rolling whenever you start spamming rend. We take the damage percentage here because we're not going to scale crit. There is a way to scale crit on on rend, but we don't care about that. Again, with the bleeding, slow, hamstring, and then it's worth it to take these 3 notes. Vulnerability, mobs, a lot of extra damage there. And then this is the fortify stuff, like as seen in all the other builds. I'm using Wrath here. Wrath, good for Berserking, good for Fury Generation, all that kind of stuff. You could use Call the Ancients as well if you wanted, but I'm using Wrath here. They're interchangeable, like I said. The Leap, Warcry, pretty much interchangeable, and then the Steel Grasp and Death Blow, interchangeable on all three of these builds. Same with the Call the Ancients and Wrath of Berserker, all 3 interchangeable. I think they're the ideal choices. And then we're doing some weapon swapping here, like in the hota setup. So you'd probably make sure you manually put your flay to your one-handed weapons. And then that means you need to have at least one, like I think one-handed axe or sword. Can't do like double maces. And then your 2-handed slashing would be on rend. Your leap would be on like your 2-handed bludgeoning, that kind of stuff. So, and then we're using Unbridled Rage. I assume this benefits 100% on rend. I can't test it, so I don't know. Otherwise, you would probably use Walking Arsenal. So, eventually, Gushing Wounds should be the best, but we're not going to have much crit chance on low geared characters, just at like level 40, 50, whatever, early game. So that's that. Same stuff here. You'll notice a lot of the exact same stuff. So these 3 are, I think, all 3 in every single setup here. Edge Masters, blah, blah, blah. We're using some basic skill. We're going to be flying a lot. You could use these in any of the other builds too, but I have it here if you want to farm it. It's not a huge difference, but it does help. Same stuff. The Standing Still one, same thing. I think the only thing different here is this one. I think it's worth using over the Shout one, especially if you're only using 1 Shout for Fury Gen. So this just makes your rend do refund a lot more Fury single target. And then we want to use damage over time gems in your weapon, since we're not scaling crit at all yet at this point. Eventually you would, but then on your weapon expertise, weapon technique, whatever it's called, I'm using just this for extra damage and lucky hit. And then you would use 2-handed axe, I believe, right? 2-handed axe, 2-handed sword. I think it's 2-handed sword. I can't actually see. But 2-handed sword. 2-handed sword or 2-handed axe, polearm. But you need to just make sure you're using, I think 2-handed sword is actually what you ideally would use. Let me double check. Because that's like a bleed bonus after you kill, yeah. So we're just pretending like we're using a sword. So just make sure you have a sword. If you don't have a sword, then you would weapon technique a sword. Then polearm or 2-handed axe is fine. This gives, you don't gain bonus from the crit, so I didn't put it there, but it is still worth using just based off the vulnerability. So I just use the polearm because, you know, whatever. I don't think it makes that much of a difference, but 2-handed axe or 2-handed polearm, and then just make sure you're using a sword, 2-handed sword. And that's pretty much the starting Barbarian builds, you'll notice there were a lot of same stuff across all 3 builds, a little bit of variance here and there, but I think all 3 of these are the best builds to start with day 1. And they're all in-game builds as well eventually. They'll just look a bit different when they have like specific legendaries and unique items and Paragon board all filled out and stuff like that, but that's pretty much what I think is good for your day 1 characters, pretty much. Get you through the campaign, all that kind of stuff, and that's pretty much it. So, hopefully that was useful if anybody was looking for this kind of stuff. So, that's it. Thanks for watching.